Okay. Let us recap meditation 6 briefly, and then we'll dive into some correspondence. So, backing up, if you recall, meditation 5 was the ontological argument for the existence of God. Meditation 6, we get the distinction between the mind and the body. Okay. Part of the way we achieve this is to draw. So a lot of the weight here is being placed on the clear and distinct perceptions. Because if we call back to meditations 2 through 4, we saw that which one can have a clear and distinct perception of, one can then know. The problem we had later on was that knowledge of the attributes, or the primary attribute / the essence of X, does not then entail that X exists. This is in stark contrast to the Aristotelian position, which maintains that if one can have knowledge of the essence of X, that then entails that that thing must exist. Whereas Descartes divorces the two propositions. One can know the primary attribute of X without then knowing that X exists, or this then entailing that X exists. So at this point in the meditations, we're stuck with the problem that we have no external world. But we get around this by the meditator affirming that she has a clear and distinct perception of a thinking thing. We established this all the way back in meditation 2. We have the meditator has a clear and distinct perception. By extension, we do as well. We've been following the meditations of a bodily thing. We get this in meditation 6. And then, because of the way the meditator is viewing this, we're also left with this conclusion that we have a clear and distinct perception of the exclusion of the bodily thing and the thinking thing. That is to say, that we can clearly and distinctly perceive as of the mind and the body being distinct from one another. And this position comes to be referred to in history of philosophy as substance dualism. Substance dualism is the position that mind and body are distinct substances. Remember, we said a substance, so to provide a definition here, a substance is that which is capable of independent existence. Okay, so this is all to say that we are now in a position in meditation 6 where we can conceive of the mind and the body as existing separately. Now remember, which is crucial, the meditator, by extension Descartes, they do not think that there are just minds wandering around somewhere, and and there's bodies just wandering around the forest from minds. This is a real distinction. So recall this, we differentiated between conceptual, modal, and real distinctions. These are all different kinds of distinctions. While we did differentiate between 1, 2, and 3 here, conceptual, modal, and real distinctions, while the mind and the body is a real distinction in that it carves at the joints of reality, this is not to say that we're going to find them in the wild, constructed in this fashion. Descartes, we'll see this in the correspondence with Elisabeth. Descartes is going to maintain that in nature, you're always going to see the union between the mind and the body. But nevertheless, the two are different substances. Okay? So this is where we're at the end of Meditation 6. By the time we get to the end of Meditation 6, if we look at where we've been and what we now have in our world, so at the end, we got God, we got minds, we got bodies, and we got an external world. Even cooler, we got these two that are linked together in what we'll call in the correspondence between Elisabeth as a union. So we're kind of back where we were, right? We've rebuilt the world. Cool. But now it's built on more solid foundation. And this solid foundation, in many ways, comes down to clear and distinct perceptions and the harmony of the will and the intellect. If you recall all the way back in Meditation 4, when we discussed the source of error, the meditator concluded that the intellect is infallible, whereas the will is fallible. And these are two separate modes of thought. The intellect always correctly affirms the truth of a proposition, but then the will can err in that the will can choose to affirm or reject the truth value that the intellect identifies for the proposition. Okay. So this is where our error comes from. But as long as we got these two working in harmony, we're kind of infallible, pretty cool, and a lot of that is also grounded in our clear and distinct perceptions. So that's kind of the meditations in a nutshell. But we get more. We now have a series of correspondences between Descartes and several of his contemporaries. And they're doing exactly what you'll do in your papers. They're all posing a series of objections and replies. Okay? The two that we will be looking at is today we will be looking at Princess Elisabeth of Bohemia. And then on our next lecture, we'll look at Ph.D. Pierre is Italian, my bad, Pietro. Same name, different language. Pietro Gassendi. Okay. Brief background, Elisabeth. She is kind of like a half-baked noble of the early modern period. Her father was the king of Bohemia, but Bohemia gets very quickly absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire. So he doesn't lose his kingship because he's still king, but he no longer has a kingdom because the kingdom gets absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire. So, kind of sort of a noble, kind of a second-rate noble, so to speak. They're not a wealthy family. So they got a title, no country, and not a lot of money. So She gets to live the life of an aristocrat, but there's really no power to be had here. So as you read the correspondences, especially with Elisabeth of Bohemia, they're going to kind of frustrate you a little bit because there is a lot of pleasantries that go on in the correspondence between Elisabeth and Descartes. Most of the dialogue between the two is simply pleasantries. Okay? It's just all deference and talking in the correct fashion. But what Elisabeth does is she poses an objection to Descartes. And here I will use Descartes, because this is Descartes speaking. This is not the meditator. And the Elisabeth's objection amounts to this. So this is her objection. How can a thinking thing causally interact with an extended thing? So this is the meat behind the objection. She frames it as a question. She's kind of saying, you screwed up here. How can a thinking thing causally interact with an extended thing? Because if you remember our Cartesian metaphysics, to some degree, we got our res cogitans, okay, our thinking thing, which is non-extended. Okay? It is essentially non-extended. This means the Cartesian mind, there is no sense in which the Cartesian mind takes up physical space. By contrast, we have the body, which is by nature an extended thing. So if we view it kind of in a chart, we have objects in the world, and we have corporeal objects and incorporeal objects. At bare minimum, we have body over here, and we have mind over here. This is fine and dandy when you're providing a classification, a taxonomy of things that exist in the world. This is totally fine for an ontological taxonomy. But the problem is, how does this interact with this? And Elisabeth is picking up on just a very common, everyday observation. That is, the mind has the ability to affect the body, right? More importantly, it's not even so much that the mind has the ability to affect the body, but the body has no capacity for thought. The body has no capacity for thought. The body is literally just meat and bones, okay, under this Cartesian view. It's a bunch of stuff, physical stuff. But the body does all kinds of things, okay? The body moves, it has functions that are happening inside the body, etc., etc. And it's not clear to Elisabeth how these kinds of functions and these kinds of happenings can occur if the body has no capacity for thought. And this seems like a genuine issue. Okay. Now, find the part where she talks about it in particular and read it to you. So she writes here, the question arises, but today Monsieur Pelot has given me such assurance of your goodwill toward everyone, and especially toward me, that I've overcome my inhibitions and come right up to the question I put to the professor, namely, given that the soul of a human being, soul and mind are the same thing, is only a thinking substance, how can it affect the bodily spirits in order to bring about voluntary actions? This is on page 1 of your PDF. The question arises because it seems that how a thing moves depends solely on 1, how much it is pushed, 2, the manner in which it is pushed, or 3, the surface texture and the shape of the thing that pushes it. The first 2 of those require contact between the 2 things, and the third requires that the causally active thing be extended. So she notes that the three ways in which bodies can move all require extension. There's nothing that it is like for a body to move that is devoid of extension. But, cool, we got an extended body, we don't have an extended mind. So how can there be voluntary action? Okay. Now, Descartes kind of treats her with kid gloves in many ways. This is also an excellent look at what year was this? The 17th century interactions between noble women and men. So on the one hand, Descartes treats her with a little bit more deference than he would just any other woman. Why? Because she does have a title. But on the other hand, he'll take her too seriously. So, Descartes, what do you do? And the way Descartes tries to get over this is deeply unsatisfying, I think. But part of it is he says, well, this is just not the aim of the meditations. He said the goal of the meditations is to show that the mind and the body are distinct, that the body is extended, and that the mind is thought. And he wasn't so much worried about this interaction problem. Okay. It's not very, doesn't really answer the question. But in order to try to get the question better, he identifies 4 notions. This is Descartes. He identifies 4 notions that he thinks are fundamental that we all have. Okay? The first is that of number or duration. So we may think of this as just quantity. The second notion is that of extension. The third is that of thought. And the fourth one is the interesting one. The fourth is that of the union between 1 and 3. So we're not very interested in number 1. For our purposes, this has no real bearing. We got this in Meditations 1, and 2, and 6. And we get this in Meditation 3. But Descartes now here is alleging that we just have a kind of a common horse sense notion of the union between extension and thought. Or between extension and thought. This is what I was saying earlier, that even though the mind and body are real distinctions in the sense that they do identify things that are separate substances, the meditator doesn't think, and Descartes does not think, because you're just going to find mind and bodies floating distinctly divorced from one another. The two are always going to be combined. Okay. Now, in order to try and motivate this distinction that Descartes is drawing here, he's going to give an analogy. So the argument that Descartes is going to provide is an argument by analogy. So we're still dealing with the question, how does the unextended interact with the extended? And instead of just giving a straightforward argument, Descartes provides an analogy here. And I think in some ways he's kind of punting. I don't think he has a very good answer to Elisabeth here, so this is the best that he can do. And the analogy that Descartes provides is that of weight and a rock. So he paints us this picture. Here's our little cliff. Here's our rock sitting on the edge of the cliff. This is rock times T1, rock times T2, rock at time T3. Rock falls off cliff. Right? Very, very straightforward. And what Descartes, and this relies on a different work that Descartes wrote called Physics. We didn't read this work. We don't need a very robust understanding of it for our purposes. But Descartes is appealing to work that he did here in this other work called Physics. So we have this state of affairs where in which a rock falls off the ledge of a cliff. Okay. We have a rock that is an extended thing. But that which is pulling the rock down, okay, is not extended. It's not like there's someone pushing the rock down as it falls through space. If I drop my marker cap, I didn't throw it down. There's no little David hand just kind of pushing it down as we go along. It just falls, okay? So it seems like this rock, as it's falling through space, is being affected by a non-extended thing. And what Descartes is going to identify as that which is affecting the rock and causing it to fall down is the weight of the rock. Okay? Now we can squabble now. I'm sure this is not copacetic with Newtonian mechanics. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've done Newtonian mechanics. But what the property that is causing this extended thing to fall down is weight. Okay? Sounds good, right? It seems like we're saying, at bare minimum, though we don't have a full picture of how this non-extended thing is affecting an extended thing, even though we don't have that picture painted, don't worry about it. At bare minimum, what we do have is a similar state of affairs elsewhere in nature. So we're ultimately trying to figure out the mind-body interaction, the interaction problem. And even though Descartes doesn't give an answer to it, he says, to some degree, look, maybe I don't have an answer, but we see this elsewhere in nature. Confer with this. Elisabeth's quick, though. She's very intelligent. She's very smart. And in a polite way, she tells Descartes, this is a terrible example. Okay. The reason she says that this is a terrible example is because it's disanalogous. So there's our rock falling off the cliff. Let's have remember, this is not a great representation because minds are non-spatial, but I need to draw it somehow. So I have to draw it in space. So we have our mind being linked to the body, and the conjunction between the mind and the body is called the union. Okay? So we have union, let's call it union 1. We have mind 1, body 1 at time t1. Okay? The mind undergoes some kind of change. We don't know what that change would look like because it's a non-spatial thing. And now we have a change in the body. Here the change is now that the body raises its arms. Okay? We still have the union, and now we're at time t2. So what Descartes is trying to show here is that this interaction between the non-spatial and the spatial, or the non-extended and the extended, is mimicked elsewhere in nature here, namely in terms of weight and things falling. But what Elisabeth wants to claim is that this analogy of the rock falling, the weight analogy, cannot begin to explain, and it is disanalogous from the mind-body interaction problem. The reason it is disanalogous goes back to the kind of distinctions that we drew. If you recall, we said that there are three different kinds of distinctions. There's modal, there is conceptual, and there are real distinctions. Okay. The mind and the body fall under three. So I can't iterate this enough. Even though in the world there are no minds without bodies and bodies without minds, the distinction between the two is real. Okay? It is possible, not plausible, remember this distinction. It is possible for minds to exist on their own. It is possible for bodies to exist on their own. And if you go back to Meditation 6, this is the role of God in Meditation 6, is to preserve this distinction between mind and body. So mind and body amount to a real distinction. To use the phrase we like to use in philosophy, it carves at the joints of reality. That is, it picks out real differences in the world. But weight is not a real distinction. Okay? Weight falls in here somewhere. Okay? Weight, the relationship between weight, the rock, and falling, there is no such thing that is weight that Descartes maintained in the physics. Now, I have no idea if this lines up with contemporary physics. No idea whatsoever. But in Cartesian physics, weight is not a real thing. Okay? Weight is simply a conceptual property. It is a mode of extension. So go all the way back to meditation 3, where we did Cartesian metaphysics. We have substance, so that which is capable of independent existence. And we have infinite substance. Our infinite substance is God. We have finite substance. Our finite substances are the mind, as well as the body. Then we have attribute, which is the essence of a thing. The attribute of the mind is thought. The attribute of the body is extension. And then our last distinction that we have is mode. And these are the ways in which thought or extension, respectively, can be manifested. So things like willing, affirming, denying, wishing, these are modes of thought. They're ways in which one can think. And color, shape, weight. Color, shape, weight, etc., density, surface texture, these kinds of things are modes of extension. They're ways in which extension can be manifested. Now here's the problem. We already said minds and bodies fall here, right? So we have substance A affecting substance B. But in the example that Descartes provides of the rock, we have a mode affecting a substance. Whereas what Elisabeth is worried about is a substance affecting a substance. And this is what Elisabeth's calling Descartes out on. She's saying, look, I got nothing to say about the weight issue. Sure, maybe this is how rocks fall. Well, Elisabeth kind of punts it. She's not interested in it. She's really focused on her question. But what she's telling Descartes is, this analogy does not work because I'm not interested in how modes affect substances. I'm interested in how substances affect substances. And this analogy just fails to capture that. Okay? So to read it to you, this is Elisabeth writing. I hope that this will excuse my stupid inability to grasp what you want me to grasp. She's not stupid. I don't see how, 1, the idea that you use to have about weight can guide us to 2, the idea we need in order to judge how the non-extended and immaterial soul can move the body. That's simply to say, I don't see how this analogy is analogous. To put some flesh on the bones of my difficulty, I don't see why we should be persuaded that A, body can be pushed by some immaterial thing, by B, the supposed power to carry the body toward the center of the earth, the power that you used wrongly to attribute to weight, which you wrongly took to be a real quality. So Elisabeth calls out Descartes saying, look, weight's not a real quality. It's not a real distinction. It's a modal distinction. Okay. Rather than being confirmed in the view that C, a body cannot be pushed by some immaterial thing by the demonstration which you promise in your physics, that D, the way weight operates, is nothing like B, namely the supposed power to carry the body toward the center of the earth. The old idea about weight may be a fiction produced by ignorance of what really moves rocks toward the center of the earth. And if we're going to try theorizing about the cause of weight, the argument might go like this, doesn't really matter. But I've never been able to conceive of what is immaterial in any way except as the bare negative, what is not material. And that can't enter into causal relations with matter. So she holds firm at this objection. Not only is she saying this is a bad analogy, but she's also going to go so far as to say, look, you still have not addressed the question. Okay? And Descartes really doesn't have much to say here. Okay? Descartes, he kind of gives this hemming and hawing discussion about how we should only spend so much time conceiving of things purely intellectually versus the amount of time we spend conceiving of the intellect with the imagination, and that we should try to conceive of the distinctness between the mind and the body so that we can understand the nature of these things, but in reality, all that we ever will perceive is the union of the mind and the body, and that this is just an exercise. Conceiving of these is just an exercise in understanding the nature of reality. That's a whole lot of words to say Descartes doesn't have an answer. Okay? Elisabeth gives Descartes it's not really an objection, but it is a massive issue that Descartes needs to resolve. This comes to be called, and it is still a very problematic issue for substance dualists. They haven't resolved this one yet. It's called the mind-body interaction problem. And the problem is exactly what Elisabeth articulates. How does the immaterial affect the material? Descartes has no answer for this. And Hobbes, we're not reading the correspondence between Descartes and Hobbes. Hobbes is going to also point this out, but in a lot less polite of a fashion. Elisabeth is really deferent and really nice to Descartes. Hobbes just insults Descartes, okay? Because Hobbes is a materialist. So we're kind of left there, where we have this problem that Descartes seemingly just walked himself into with substance dualism, but has no way of getting out of. I will give you one, or I'll give you two, ways in which this problem has been some purported resolutions to the problem. These are not good resolutions. One is just to appeal to the laws of physics, whatever that means. And this conception views laws as real things. So they're not just codifications of the ways in which the world works. This conception of laws is to say that there is a real thing such in the world that is, for example, the law of gravity or the law of electromagnetism. These are actual things that exist out in the world. So one resolution is to say, look, we may not have a full answer, we're just not there in neuroscience, but the laws of physics can explain how the immaterial mind interacts with the corporeal body. Okay, but by self-admission, this resolution usually says, look, we're just not there in neuroscience. Okay, there's not much you can do with that, right? It's like, okay, we're not there yet, but you still haven't explained how this interaction works. By contrast, and this is a long since dead theory, this was a common theory at the time of Descartes, was a view called occasionalism. Occasionalism is a very interesting view. So what occasionalism maintains is that bodies never things never interact directly with one another. So when I take my marker and I hit the desk, the marker never interacted with the desk. Because between object A having an effect on object B, there's always the intermediary, and the intermediary is always God. Okay? So this is to say, and like I said, this is a theory that is a contemporary of Descartes. It's just a really bad theory because it makes God do way too much work, amongst other issues. Is to say, when I take the marker and hit the desk, the marker never actually causes a sound that you hear from the desk. Rather, the marker interacts with it, so it becomes, placed on the desk, but then God produces the sound. Okay? So another example would be, let's say you're playing catch with a friend, you throw the ball, you miss, you break your neighbor's window. Okay? What the occasionalist is committed to saying is, you threw the ball, but the ball did not break the window. You threw the ball. At some point, the ball becomes contiguous. That means it touches the window, but then God breaks the window. What the occasionalist is committed to saying is that God produces all effects between causal interactions. So if we apply this to the mind-body problem, what this is to say is when I think in my head, move my arm, and I pick up my arm, I had the thought, this is the cause, but God produces the effects. Hopefully you see why this is a really bad view. So not only does it get God on the hook for doing potentially really bad things, it just seems like a nonsense explanation to say that there's no causal interaction between two relata, that God has to be the intermediary between every single causal interaction. That seems just woefully unnecessary. So this is kind of where we're at with the end of this correspondence between Elisabeth and Descartes. We have a problem. Elisabeth did an excellent job of articulating and pressing the issue, and Descartes kind of flounders. Next time we're going to look at the interaction between Gassendi and Descartes. That one is long, so start reading ahead of time. Like Elisabeth, Gassendi is very amenable to Descartes. He wants Descartes to have a fruitful response. He's not one of the mean ones like Hobbes or someone. So we'll read Gassendi next time, but I'll do that for now.